G'day, my name is Shay with Box Collector, and today I'll be teaching you how to play the 2-4 player game Strattegee, designed by Steve Thomson and published by Strattegee. Now, Strattegee is basically a chess war game. Each player controls land and air units trying to keep your headquarters safe while destroying your opponents. If you destroy your opponent's headquarters, you win. You'll maneuver your crews to protect as many of your units as possible while also trying to take out your opponent's key units to help you secure your victory. Strattegee comes with 2 maps. The Lone Commander map, which is designed for a 1v1, doesn't have an airfield and only an army headquarters. The Allied map is designed for 2v2, but can be played 1v1 and has an airfield as well as an army headquarters and air force headquarters, and includes a unit unique to the Allied map, the Stealth Bomber. Once you've got the Lone Commander or Allied map out, you will then place units on the back 2 lines of each side of the board, just like chess. Units are placed on their specific quadrant, indicated by the text on each quadrant. The fighter goes on the F quadrant. The helicopters go on the H quadrants. The tank on the T1 and T2 quadrants. The armored vehicles on the AV1 and AV2 quadrants. The machine guns on the G quadrants. The SAM on the SAM quadrant. The missile launcher on the GGM quadrant. The commandos on the star quadrants. The ammo on the ammo quadrant, and the headquarters on the HQ quadrant. If you're playing the Allied map, the Stealth Bomber goes on the B quadrant, and the Air Force headquarters goes on the HQ next to the landing strip. Once you're all set up, someone will take a black and white commando in their hands, and the other player or alliance chooses a hand and plays with the color they choose. If playing an alliance game, you will also need to decide who is the army and who is the Air Force commander. Black always goes first. When playing an allied game, the black commander goes first, then you alternate to the white, black, white. If you're playing an allied game, the black Air Force commander goes, then the white Air Force commander, then the black army commander, and then the white army commander. On your turn, you can move 2 different units, fire from 2 different units, or move 1 unit and fire from another unit. You just can't use the same unit twice in 1 turn. And at the end of your turn, you can rearm units that are in the loading zones. When playing an allied game, players can only control their units, not their allies' units. If an allied player ever loses their headquarters, they still have control over their units and are only out of the game once all their units are gone. And the game ends when both headquarters are destroyed. You can do an allied game with just 2 players, with each player controlling both the army and air force. In Strattegee, each unit can hold a specified amount of ammo, either the red high explosive ammo or the silver rapid fire ammo. When a unit is hit with a high explosive round, they cannot defend it and are destroyed. With rapid fire ammo, however, if the unit being fired on has ammo themselves and is in the line of fire of an allied unit that has rapid fire ammo, then they can defend against the attack. They are not taken out and instead spend their rapid fire ammo. Any ammo spent is always returned back to the ammo depot. Now, it's important to understand line of fire. If there are 2 units of the same type in the line of fire, so in this case 2 land units, the first unit exposed to fire is called the leading piece. When using rapid fire ammo, you cannot shoot through a leading piece to take out the one behind it. This applies to both land and air units. Most units are able to fire around, under, or over friendly units. They aren't considered leading pieces. The only unit that cannot fire at enemy units when a friendly unit is in front of them is the machine gun. And that's only if the friendly unit in front of them is a land unit and the enemy unit is a land unit. Just like in chess with the king, the most important thing to protect in Strattegee is your headquarters. To protect it, you will want to have land units in its line of fire to keep it from being destroyed. So if this fighter wanted to take out this headquarters, it can't, since this machine gunner is in the way. But if this fighter was instead firing from over here, then the headquarters would be destroyed, since the fighter now has line of fire directly to the headquarters. If this tank wanted to take out this armored vehicle, it easily can, since it can shoot over occupied quadrants. And this tank can hit this fighter, since it can shoot under air units. But if this tank wanted to take out this helicopter, it can't, since this fighter is a leading piece. To keep your units safe, you can provide them with cover. A unit is covered when they are within the covering fire of an armed unit with rapid fire ammo, and the unit being fired upon also has rapid fire ammo. If the unit being fired upon has high explosive ammo, they cannot defend, even if they are covered and they're destroyed. So although this fighter can attack this machine gunner, it can't destroy it, since this machine gunner has ammo to defend with, and it's being covered by this armored vehicle. However, if the machine gunner or the armored vehicle didn't have any ammo left, then the machine gunner would be destroyed. You can see how much and what type of ammo a unit has by looking at the ammo symbol on unit tokens. So this fighter starts off with 4 rapid fire ammo, and the rounds get slotted into these holes on the base. And this commando has 1 high explosive ammo. The fighter starts with 4 rapid-fire silver rounds, moves like the queen in chess, able to move in any direction from 0 to 4 quadrants. The fighter fires from its position in any direction from 1 to 5 quadrants at air and ground targets, and can provide cover fire in any direction 1 to 5 quadrants from both air and ground attacks against rapid-fire ammo. The helicopter starts with 2 rapid-fire silver rounds. The helicopter moves like the bishop in chess, able to move diagonally from 0 to 12 quadrants, and can fire from its position 1 to 5 quadrants diagonally at air and ground targets, and can provide cover fire diagonally 1 to 5 quadrants from both air and ground attacks against rapid-fire ammo. Both the fighter and the helicopter can move over ground units, between aircraft, through friendly aircraft, but cannot move through quadrants occupied by opposing aircraft. Air units can travel over trees, they just can't stop on top of them. The tank starts with 4 rapid-fire silver rounds and moves like the rook in chess, able to move horizontally and vertically 1 to 5 quadrants armed and 1 to 10 quadrants disarmed. The tank fires from its position 1 to 5 quadrants horizontally and vertically at air and ground targets, and can provide cover vertically and horizontally 1 to 5 quadrants from both air and ground attacks against rapid-fire ammo. The armored vehicle starts with 3 rapid-fire rounds and moves like the bishop in chess or like the helicopter, able to move diagonally 1 to 5 quadrants armed or 1 to 10 quadrants unarmed. The armored vehicle fires from its position 1 to 5 quadrants diagonally at air and ground targets, and can provide cover diagonally 1 to 5 quadrants from both air and ground attacks against rapid-fire ammo. The machine gun starts with 3 rapid-fire rounds and moves like the queen in chess or like the fighter, able to move in any direction from 1 to 2 quadrants armed or 1 to 4 quadrants unarmed. The machine gun fires from its position 1 to 2 quadrants in any direction at air and ground targets, and can provide cover in any direction 1 to 2 quadrants from both air and ground attacks against rapid-fire ammo. Now, all 3 of these units can move under aircraft, in flight, and diagonally between occupied quadrants, but they cannot move through quadrants occupied by ground pieces or directly through trees. And all of these units can fire at air targets over landscapes, structures, trees, friendly ground crews, around friendly aircraft in the line of fire, and under enemy aircraft at opposing ground pieces. Now, both the armored vehicle and the tank can shoot over friendly ground units to hit enemy ground units. But the machine gunner cannot do that because they can't shoot up, they can only shoot forward. So if you have a unit in the way, you can't fire on an enemy. The SAM starts with 3 high explosive rounds and moves like the queen in chess, or like the fighter and the machine gun, able to move in any direction 1 quadrant armed, or 1 to 2 quadrants unarmed. The SAM fires from its position 1 to 5 quadrants in any direction, only at air targets. The SAM can move under aircraft in flight and diagonally between occupied quadrants, but cannot move through quadrants occupied by ground pieces or directly through trees. The SAM's missiles are guided and can fly through any occupied quadrants, meaning that it could hit this helicopter, even though there's a leading piece. The SAM can be covered, but cannot provide covering fire. The missile launcher starts with 2 high explosive rounds and moves like the queen in chess, or like the fighter, machine gun, and SAM, able to move in any direction 1 to 5 quadrants armed, or 1 to 10 quadrants unarmed. The missile launcher fires from its position exactly 5 quadrants away in any direction only at ground targets. The missile launcher can move under aircraft in flight and diagonally between occupied quadrants, but cannot move through quadrants occupied by ground pieces or directly through trees. Like the SAM, the missile launcher's missiles are guided and can fly through any occupied quadrant to hit its target, as long as, again, it's exactly 5 away. The SAM can be covered, but cannot provide cover. The commandos start with 1 high explosive round and move like the knight in chess, in an L shape, except the commando moves 3 quadrants in one straight line and then 1 quadrant to either side. And if it's unarmed, it can do that twice. Commandos move to the target that they are destroying, and they can be covered, but they cannot provide cover fire. There are 2 types of commando: the regular commando, which uses C4 to destroy ground targets, and the commando MPADs, which use their man-portable air defense system to take out air targets. The commandos can travel through aircraft in flight, and unlike every other ground unit, can travel through any occupied quadrant. When a commando is attacking, it goes to the piece it's targeting and removes that piece. Commandos, armed or unarmed, have camouflage, which conceals and protects them from rapid-fire ammo attacks, from aircraft when in any of the 8 quadrants adjacent to trees, or from ground fire when directly behind trees. But commandos can be destroyed by high explosive ammo when camouflaged. Commandos can be covered but cannot provide covering fire. You can use your entire turn to redeploy 1 or 2 commandos from any quadrant immediately around an extracting unit, which extracting units are helicopters and armored vehicles. So this commando is in one of the 8 spaces around this helicopter, so it could be picked up by this helicopter, and then following the movement rules of the helicopter, you can move the helicopter with the unit and redeploy the commando in one of the 8 spaces around the deploying unit. The last unit is a stealth bomber, which starts with 1 rapid fire round and moves like the queen in chess, or like the fighter, machine gun, SAM, and missile launcher. It's able to move in any direction 1 to 24 quadrants. The stealth bomber can fly over any ground occupied quadrants, past friendly aircraft in flight, and diagonally between aircraft, but cannot fly through quadrants occupied by enemy aircraft in flight. The stealth bomber drops a bomb on moving to and occupying the target quadrant, any direction 1 to 5 quadrants only on ground targets, and can bomb commandos in camouflage. The stealth bomber can be covered when in flight, but cannot provide covering fire. Now that you understand each unit, you're ready to play. Of course, unlike chess, there is a lot more to think about. You need to make sure your units have ammo to provide return fire, and that they are covered. But if you remember that, and how each unit moves, it really is just an upgraded chess. Now that you know how to play, I'm going to have my buddy Brian join me for a 2-player game. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to narrate the game, mainly because we actually do not a lot of talking. It's a very thinky game, so both of us many times we're just kind of sitting and doing things in silence. So I'm going to walk you through my thought process with all of my moves as we play along. All right, now obviously I don't really know a good strategy. I've played chess before, but I'm just going to I want to keep all of the units immediately around the HQ as long as possible, just to ensure that it's protected. And the commandos, in my opinion, seem a little, at least at the beginning of the game, I don't exactly know how to use them best. And you know, they're a pretty great unit because they can just take anyone out. So I am going to hold off using those as well. So for now, I'm just going to move my tank forward. It's important to note that we accidentally messed up on our setup. We put down 2 fighters instead of 1, which you're supposed to have only 1. So just keep that in mind. Maybe it's a variation you want to play with, who knows? But not supposed to have 2, just have 1. All right, so I got my tank out as my first turn, just trying to decide here. And then for my second turn, I go ahead and take my helicopter, move it diagonally over. Again, I'm not really sure where a good spot to put it is, but that's just where I'm putting it. And then Brian, he's ready to go. He's a quick thinker. So he's got his gunner. He's moving his armored vehicle out front and then moving his machine gunner directly behind it, which in my opinion, I thought was pretty interesting because, really kind of opening a spot directly in front of the HQ, which, at least to me seemed risky, but that's what he's going with. All right, and then I don't know what I'm thinking here. I moved the helicopter going forward as if it's a tank. It cannot move forward. It only moves sideways. So I couldn't tell you why I thought that was correct, but it was not. And then we also have a discussion wondering, because I hadn't gotten this clarification yet from the designer, if you could land an air unit on top of a tree. You can't. So double whammy, incorrect. My bad. The tank is covered by the helicopter to its diagonal left and is providing cover to the helicopter to its right, even though the helicopter isn't supposed to be there, but that was my thought process. So at the moment, all 3 units are covered because that helicopter on the left there is covered by the machine gunners. And then I go ahead and I push the tank forward next to the other tank so that it is also covered. And then once again, Brian's really quick on the draw. He's ready to go. He moves his tank forward, but at the moment it is not covered. So then he flies his fighter over directly next to it so that now the tank is covered and the tank is covering the fighter. Now, luckily for me, Brian realizes, wait, how is your helicopter here? It can't be here. So luckily he was able to call that out and I was able to fix that mistake, moving it instead over to the left so that it's covered by the tank still. However, again, not allowed to be on a tree. And I'm going to cut a bunch of the waiting as we play this game, but just know I sit and agonize every turn. It takes me forever. Brian, super quick. So after thinking a long time about it, I decide to move my tank over 1 space to the left. So then I take my armored vehicle and I move it diagonally over in between the 2 tanks so that the tanks are providing cover to the armored vehicle. And the tank on the right is still covered by that helicopter a couple lines behind and to the left. But technically the tank on the left isn't covered by a unit. All right, so Brian is starting off his turn attacking my armored vehicle with his fighter. But again, it's covered. So I spend a round from my armored vehicle. He spends a round from his fighter. And then for his second turn, he moves out his commando. However, he wasn't aware that the commando actually moves 1 and 3 instead of 1 and 2. All right, so then I move my helicopter 1 space over in front of his tank, and then I move my tank up a space so that it's covering the helicopter. And the tank is still covered by the armored vehicle. And then for Brian's first turn, he goes ahead and attacks my helicopter with his tank. My helicopter is covered by my tank, so I spend an ammo, he spends an ammo. And then for his second turn, he shoots underneath his fighter using his armored vehicle, shooting my helicopter. Luckily, my helicopter isn't dead, but it is now out of ammo. So I need to get it out of there, is kind of my thought there. Obviously, don't want to lose the helicopter. 1, because air units are just super helpful and they can extract commandos. So for my first action, So then I think about bringing back my helicopter into the loading zone, but then in my head I'm thinking, oh wait, I can't because it's obstructed by the commando, but maybe I didn't think about it, or maybe I just didn't want to do it this way, but air units can travel over land units. So I could have put it into the bottom right corner of the loading zone, but I decided instead I'm just going to move the commando. So I take the ground commando and move it over. And then Brian realizes that my movement is 3 and 1. So then he decides that he's going to change the movement that he had originally done, since he didn't understand the movement properly. And I decide to slightly change the position of my commando. And then now I bring my helicopter into the loading zone. And now that both of my turns are over, I can reload the helicopter. All right, so Brian is attacking my armored vehicle with his fighter, but my armored vehicle is covered, so we both spend an ammo. And then he's moving his commando over, getting closer to my units. So now I just need to kind of, look around, make sure, okay, can that commando get any of my units here? And also the commando's protected with those trees. So I want to get that commando. So I'm just thinking here, what unit would be best? And I decide to move my armored vehicle over a couple of spaces so that now the commando is in my armored vehicle's line of fire, and the armored vehicle is also covered by the fighter. And then I go ahead, grab my helicopter, move it over, and my helicopter is covered by my tank. So my thought was, I'll put my helicopter here because it can attack the tank and the fighter can't attack me. But I'm not sure I'm thinking about the tank that's in front of me, his tank that's still on his line. For Brian's turn, he knows that obviously his commando's in trouble because it's not hiding behind a tree against my armored vehicle. So he just goes ahead, retreats it. All right, so then Brian uses his fighter to once again attack my armored vehicle. And now my armored vehicle is out of ammo, so I will need to retreat that for sure. The only problem is I don't have a good path at the moment to get to the loading zone. So to make a space, I'm going to go ahead and grab my fighter and move it behind my tank, knowing that it can still provide cover fire to my other tank that I just abandoned. And then I'm able to bring back my armored vehicle into the loading zone and rearm it. Now, unfortunately for me, I went right into the worst spot I could have gone. Brian's air commando was poised to take out my helicopter, which he then does. So super bummed that I lost that. And then Brian tries to attack my commando with his fighter, which he can't because air units can't attack commandos when they're around a tree. So he's going to instead attack my tank with his armored vehicle. But again, my tank is covered, so I discard an ammo. All right, so I decide to move my fighter one space over, so it's still covering and being covered. But my thought here is, maybe I'll move it forward eventually and try to make some moves against some of his other pieces. Then I use my tank to fire at his armored vehicle, which the tank can shoot over the tree. So I go ahead and shoot it. It was covered, but now he's out of ammo. But it's not like that's really a big deal because he's got a clear shot back to the loading zone. So of course, his first turn, he retreats the armored vehicle to the loading zone, and then he moves his fighter forward so that he can attack my tank while also not being in my tank's line of fire. But my fighter could just shoot at him. Also, at the moment, his fighter is now completely uncovered. And also, Brian gets to rearm his armored vehicle now that his turns are over. Now, the problem is, it can sometimes be hard to remember what units can hit what when there's a unit in front of you and whatnot. So I completely do not see that I could shoot his fighter with my fighter and he would just be gone. He'd be dead, which would be amazing because fighters are, they can move in any direction really far and they have 4 ammo, which is a lot. So I don't realize this, but in my opinion, the fighter's probably the most important unit. So instead, I move my fighter up a couple of spaces and my tank up a couple of spaces so that they're both providing cover fire to one another, while also going into a position that his fighter can't attack my units. At least the one on the right, the one on the left can. And his machine gunner can shoot at my tank, but that's what I decide. My thought process, though, is his fighter on the left only has 1 round, so I want to either take it out or make it retreat. I could go after his commando that he's left without ammo, but he's not a threat without his ammo, so I don't know. I probably should have taken it out, but I had more important thoughts, I suppose. Anyway, so yeah, his machine gunner is now taking out my tank. So we both spend an ammo there. And then he moves his armored vehicle 1 spot, so now he can attack my fighter. I go ahead and shoot his fighter with my fighter. And now that his fighter has no ammo, I take it out with my tank. So now his machine gunner is shooting my tank. He wanted to shoot my machine gunner with his armored vehicle, but he can't because that's not in its line of fire. So instead, he finds a better alternative. He attacks my tank with his tank, taking it out. So we basically just did a trade. Personally, I like that trade. I think, like I said before, the fighter's better than the tank. But again, if I had just seen that other fighter completely exposed, I mean, it's still exposed, but I could have taken it out and then not lost a piece. Now, the problem I have is my fighter is not covered. So first, I move my armored vehicle over so that it can target the tank while also being safe from being targeted by any of his units, and then move my fighter back 1 so that the armored vehicle is now covering my fighter. Brian now pushes one of his gunners up, which now, I mean, that really leaves his headquarters quite exposed, but now that leaves my armored vehicle open to an attack. However, it is covered by my fighter, at least. Then he moves his armored vehicle over so that the armored vehicle can also attack my fighter. Again, though, that fighter of his is still unprotected. I move my fighter forward. Unfortunately, his ammo is just 1 space outside of my range, because taking out his ammo would be awesome. But I went there just because I want to try and make a play on his headquarters, is my thought. I think I should have gone 2 more forward, because then I could have moved to the right and then it would have been open to an attack. So I'm not sure what my thought was on that placement, but for my second action, I decide to move my fighter back a couple of spaces. Now his commando is open to an attack. Now that fighter isn't covered, but if I look at the board, his armored vehicle that's directly behind his fighter over on the right could hit me because I'm 5 away. Brian moves his tank over so that he can target my commando, who's currently not camouflaged against it. And then he attacks my armored vehicle with his machine gunner. I think my idea for moving my fighter to where it is so that it was providing cover fire on that armored vehicle. So since it's covered, I spend an ammo. All right, I then use my fighter to take out his commando. I still need to spend one of my rounds on that, which I completely forget to do. I notice that my commando is in danger, so I go ahead, move that out of the way. Brian's ready for his turn. He moves his helicopter over, and it's being covered by his tank. However, his helicopter can't shoot anything, so I'm not entirely sure what his plan is there. And then he moves his tank forward to threaten my armored vehicle. I decide to move my armored vehicle over so that I can put a threat on his headquarters. But the issue at the moment is that piece is not covered. So then I decide to move my fighter over so that it's providing cover. And then a smart move on his part, instead of worrying about protecting his headquarters with the unit, he just eliminates my threat by using his tank and machine gunner to remove my 2 rounds from my armored vehicle. So I move my tank back a space because I need to leave myself room to bring my armored vehicle out of there. And then I move my armored vehicle over. And now I'm just kind of thinking what spot I want to put it in based on where I want it to end up after reloading it. So then, of course, he moves his armored vehicle over so that my armored vehicle is now being threatened to get destroyed. Then using his fighter, he attacks my tank. I accidentally took the ammo from the wrong unit, so I go ahead and fix that up. Now, my turn. Obviously, don't want my armored vehicle to get destroyed, so I have to fix that. But what I need to do first is I want to make a spot available to me for reloading. So I move my commando out of there, and then I am able to move my armored vehicle into the loading zone. My turn's over, so now I can rearm. Once again, he's using his fighter to attack my tank, and then he's moving his other fighter over. I move my tank over just to kind of get it out of the heat a little bit, especially since it only has 1 round left, kind of putting it in a position to reload in a future turn. But then I realized that my fighter is actually not covered, so I'll move my tank over to provide cover. And then now I'm just kind of thinking, do I want to move my fighter over to threaten his fighter? It would be covered by the tank, but only for 1 round. But I'm not sure if I see this or not. I do have my helicopter available down in the loading zone to provide some cover fire. So wouldn't be a terrible move because I have a little bit more ammo. So it'd be nice to at least kind of threaten the fighter out of there. But then, of course, he has his other fighter that could then just shoot. So it's a hard decision there. Now, moving my fighter there would also provide some protection for my commando, who's now open to a kill from his fighter. So I go ahead and move my fighter. Not sure if I think having my fighter protect it would probably have been better, but who knows. All right, Brian's first move, he's moving his tank forward. So now, once again, he's threatening my commando. And then for his second, he's moving his helicopter over so that he can attack my tank, which once again only has the 1 round left. So I move my fighter over, and in my head I'm thinking, great, now my commando's covered. But that's not the case because it's an air unit, so it's not a leading piece to a land unit. And then I move my armored vehicle over so that my fighter is covered. Luckily for Brian, he catches my mistake and destroys my commando with his tank. Then he uses his other tank to attack my armored vehicle, leaving it now with no ammo. I decide to bring out my armored vehicle to threaten his fighter, while still being covered by my machine gunners and providing cover to my fighter, who is now left without any cover. And then I am attacking his tank with my fighter, leaving his tank with no more ammo. So kind of a trade there, tank for tank, no more ammo in each, but I'm not sure what I'm thinking because my tank is very easily open to an attack from his fighter. Brian's first move, he moves his tank out of the way, and then he picks off my tank because luckily for him, he caught my mistake using his tank. I see that his tank only has 1 round left. I feel like it would have been smart, though, to have maybe set up another unit so that I could double tap it, because obviously his tank's just going to retreat, which, I mean, my fighter has 4 rounds, so it's not like it's in that much harm. I then use my armored vehicle to attack his fighter, leaving him with only 1 round left. Brian's turn, first move, he retreats his tank, obviously, and luckily for him, it's 5 away, so outside of my fighter's range. And then on my turn, I move my fighter over to cover my other fighter because I want to move my fighter. So I move my fighter up 1 space to threaten his gunner, his machine gunner. First move, he puts his tank in his loading zone because with me having moved my fighter forward, it did put it a threat of a loss there. and then he moves his tank over one space. I'm assuming so that he can rearm it in a later turn. His turns are over, so now he can rearm the tank he put in the loading zone. Now I move my fighter over one space because now I am threatening his headquarters, but that is leaving my fighter vulnerable. So then I move my other fighter up so that they are both providing cover to one another. He moves his gunner over a couple of spaces so that he can protect his headquarters. And then once again, I completely forget about those stupid commandos and he takes out my fighter. So then I want to take out his commando, but then Brian reminds me because it's an air unit and the commando is around a tree, it is camouflage, so I can't. Which means there's not really a lot I can do around there. I mean, I'm not in any major threat at the moment, but also not covered. Don't like being there, so I'm going to go ahead and retreat that unit. And those are my 2 turns. So then Brian retreats his commando back so that he can reload it. And then he moves his tank also to be reloaded. For my first turn, I decide to move my commando forward. Maybe I can place it into a position to catch him off guard, who knows? At this point, it's just kind of hard for me to know what to do. I don't have really any units left. And then for my second turn, I move my helicopter over, but honestly, I'm not entirely sure why. At the moment, it's not threatening anything. Now he's moving his tank out, ready to be used again. He's considering moving his armored vehicle, which then he does decide to move over. Now, I don't notice his fighter is still not covered over there. I'm not sure what sort of threat he's trying to apply with his armored vehicle. I go ahead, move my fighter up, because at the moment, my armored vehicle way out in the corner is currently covering my fighter. And now if I wanted, I could shoot under his helicopter to get that machine gunner that only has 1 round. Brian moves his tank over so that now he's threatening my fighter. And then with his helicopter, he attacks my fighter. I move my land commando over so that now, if I wanted, I could take out his armored vehicle. Once again, I struggle with helicopters. I don't know why, but I move it like it's a tank so that I can attack his helicopter. But again, that movement's completely illegal. And I really struggle with how units get covered by only its type, and also like you can't even provide cover anyway when you have high explosive. I don't know. I completely forget. I really struggle with commandos. So Brian's just really good at picking that up, which is unfortunate for me, fortunate for him. So he uses his tank to take out my commando. So I literally never get to use my commandos. And then he attacks my fighter with his helicopter. But then I think he realizes if he did that, then he would die. So instead, he is going to bring his fighter back to reload. And maybe he also realized he wasn't covered. Who knows? All right, so his turn's over. He resupplies his fighter. Then I use my helicopter to take out his ammo, which again, technically shouldn't be legal because I moved the helicopter very wrong. But I mean, then again, I could have just gone 1 space up and to the left and still accomplished the same thing. So I thought I was really in trouble because he took out so many of my really important units. But luckily, I was able to take out his ammo, which is going to really hurt his efforts. He's going to use his machine gunner to fire on my fighter and then use his tank, and now my fighter is dead. So yeah, great. His ammo's out, but as far as units that I have left, other than, all of my stuff that I haven't moved in the back line, which are just the machine gunners and the SAM, and I only have 2 armored vehicles and a helicopter. So I am not doing good, at all. Using my helicopter, I fire on his helicopter. So now it's not threatening me, but also it's not like that helicopter can do anything anymore. I see his helicopter has no ammo and is in range of my armored vehicle, so I fire on his helicopter, taking it out. He then moves his tank forward to threaten my helicopter, and then moves his fighter forward onto the tree, which, as I've said before, isn't actually legal. And his fighter is unprotected, but I don't have any units threatening it at the moment. I'm not sure if he's planning on maybe just trying to shoot out my machine gunner. Maybe. Obviously, I move my helicopter back so that it doesn't get destroyed. And I'm just trying to think, where do I want to put it in order for it to rearm later? I put it there so that it's being covered while also in position to rearm next turn. And then I decide to move my armored vehicle back a little bit, and that's because it itself wasn't covered. Brian moves his tank over. I think what he's thinking is he can slide it now all the way down into my loading zone and then take out my ammo. Because if he takes out my ammo, he'll get his ammo back. And then he moves his other tank forward so that, I'm assuming so that he's covering his tank. But I mean, his other tank's not threatened at the moment, so I don't know how important that is. But at least that tank that he just moved is covered because my armored vehicle could take it out. I then move Gunner 3 up and to the right, and then Gunner 2 up and to the right. So I'm still kind of, maintaining a wall. Don't want any holes open. He then moves his tank down. I don't know, not sure what his thought is there. But then he uses his other tank to fire on my machine gunner. But since he moved his tank, his other tank is now uncovered, which I notice and use my armored vehicle to take out his tank. I move my SAM up 1, so now his fighter is being threatened to get destroyed. So he sees that his fighter is being threatened, so he moves that over. It's not being covered at the moment, I don't think, but it's also not being threatened by anything. And then he uses his tank to attack my armored vehicle. So I just want to keep pressure on his fighter. So I move my SAM over, and then I move my machine gunner over a spot. Honestly, I think at this point, just because I don't know what other unit to move. So again, he sees his fighter is being threatened, so he moves it back to where it was before. And then for a second turn, he uses his tank to attack my armored vehicle, and now my armored vehicle has no more ammo. So for my turn, I'm just going to bring my armored vehicle back into the loading zone, and then I move my machine gunner over so that I can threaten his unprotected, his uncovered tank. Using his fighter, he attacks my machine gunner and then moves his tank over one spot so that he's no longer threatened. I just want to keep the pressure on his tank, so I move my machine gunner over, and then I move my armored vehicle finally into the loading zone and rearm it. He then uses his fighter to attack my machine gunner, and now my machine gunner is out of ammo, and then he moves his tank once again out of harm's way, while of course still threatening my helicopter. Now I'm thinking here, his fighter is a lot more valuable than my machine gunner, so I'd rather take out his fighter. So I move my SAM over. So now I'm threatening his fighter, and now he has to make the choice. Does he want to swap or does he want to run away? And then to avoid my helicopter being destroyed by his tank, I move it out of the tank's line of fire. Brian moves his armored vehicle back one space, not sure why. And then he moves his fighter away from the SAM instead of deciding to lose it in exchange for my machine gunner. And then I move my armored vehicle out of the loading zone so that my helicopter next turn can go in. Brian then moves his armored vehicle on the far right, closer to my side. The armored vehicle is covered by his fighter. And, I suppose his armored vehicle is threatening mine, but I'm not entirely sure what his plan is there. Just, I think, getting it in to threaten some stuff. And then he moves his tank back. First, I'm going to move my armored vehicle. It's not necessary, but now I'm threatening his fighter. And then I move my helicopter into the loading zone and resupply. His fighter isn't being covered by anything, so he moves the fighter out of the way and then brings his armored vehicle down, which is being covered by the tank, but the tank itself at the moment still isn't being covered. I move my helicopter over to threaten his armored vehicle, and then move my machine gunner into the loading zone to rearm. For Brian's first turn, he's attacking my helicopter with his armored vehicle, and then he's moving his other armored vehicle over to threaten destroying my SAM. So then I move my machine gunner over in front of my SAM to protect it, and then if I don't move or protect my helicopter, then it'll get destroyed because it could get double tapped from his fighter and his armored vehicle. So then I move my machine gunner in front to protect it from the fighter. And now I'm threatening his fighter, which currently is unprotected. So then he moves his fighter out of the way, and then my machine gunner is also threatening his armored vehicle. So he moves his armored vehicle as well. So I move my armored vehicle to threaten his since it's uncovered, and then I move my machine gunner to threaten his fighter. He then moves his armored vehicle so that now he's threatening to take out my ammo depot, and then moves his fighter over to take out my missile launcher. So I move my SAM down because I don't really care if I lose my missile launcher. I'd rather threaten to take out his fighter. And then I move my machine gunner up one, so now he can't take out my ammo depot. So to avoid getting his fighter destroyed, he retreats it, and now he's covering his armored vehicle. However, his fighter isn't covered, which at the moment isn't an issue because my armored vehicle can't take it out. He moves his armored vehicle out of the way so that he has a free shot for his tank to threaten my ammo depot, which I don't realize. So I'm going to move my machine gunner up to threaten both his tank and armored vehicle, because both of them at the moment aren't covered. And then I am going to attack his armored vehicle with my armored vehicle. All right, so then he moves his tank forward to threaten that ammo depot, and then moves his commando forward. All right, so now what I'm thinking is I can't use my helicopter to defend my ammo depot, and my machine gunners are too far away to be able to protect it. So I'm definitely going to lose my ammo depot. But what I can do is threaten the loss of his immediately after. So I move my helicopter into position so that if he decides to take out my ammo depot, he will immediately lose his. And then I move my machine gunner over so that now I'm threatening his uncovered tank. Unfortunately for me, which happens all the time, I lose my armored vehicle to his commando because I never see it coming. And then since he sees taking out my ammo would basically be useless, he retreats his tank and threatens my machine gunner, who at the moment is uncovered. So then I move my machine gunner over so that I'm covering it and it's covering me. And then I bring my helicopter all the way back so that I can rearm. He moves his tank over one so that now his commando is being protected from my machine gunner, and then moves his fighter back to protect his armored vehicle all the way on the left over there. I move my machine gunner up and then move my other machine gunner to threaten his fighter. He moves his armored vehicle to take out my ammo depot and moves his fighter out of the way while also covering his tank. I move my machine gunner back to protect my ammo depot and then bring my helicopter forward to threaten his commando. Unfortunately for me, I didn't see that I left my machine gunner now completely uncovered, so he takes it out with his tank, which not having a machine gunner over there now is going to make things really difficult to guard that whole side. And then he moves his armored vehicle over one space, so now it's being covered by his tank. His armored vehicle is now left uncovered, so I take it out with my armored vehicle. And then I bring my armored vehicle back into the loading zone to rearm. He then moves his armored vehicle underneath my helicopter, threatening my ammo depot, and then moves his tank forward to provide it with cover. Now I'm not really left with many options, because since his armored vehicle is being protected, even if I attacked him with my helicopter, he would still have one round left to take out my ammo depot. So as I did before, I used my helicopter to threaten his ammo depot, and then move my machine gunner over one space to protect my armored vehicle from being attacked by his tank. Moves his fighter over and actually puts me in checkmate without me realizing it. Because my headquarters is currently open to an attack from his fighter. My armored vehicle can't move in any way to get in the way of the fighter's line of sight, and neither can my machine gunner and helicopter. But I don't even realize that. So I move my armored vehicle one space so that I can threaten to attack his armored vehicle and then move my machine gunner over to cover it. And now Brian points out that he has won the game because he has taken out my headquarters. So great game on him. Yeah, ultimately in the end, I was just left way too thin. I think losing that machine gunner on that left side over there really, really hurt me. That machine gunner would have been able to put a lot of pressure on all of those pieces that he's got over there. So ultimately, Brian played a better game and I made tons of mistakes. But just like chess, this is absolutely one of those games where as you learn all of the different movements of all of the pieces and you become more aware of the surroundings of how covering works, being able to shoot under or over units, then I think this could absolutely be a game just like chess where you could play it for 20 years and still not get tired of it because you're just refining your strategy. All right, so that is the game. I hope you enjoyed it. It was very thinky.
Yes, it was.
It was fun. It was good.
Yes.
Good time. Good war game.
If you're the type of gamer who doesn't talk at all because you're so invested in the game, and then it's your type of game.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't talk at all.
We hardly spoke at all.
Yeah.
Each of us just are in our own little world, strategizing, thinking of the next thing to do.
So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to check out my other content, and we will see you next time.